with today's topic. Welcome again. I'm really happy that you're all taking part in this again. So it's the same as always. If you have questions for me, you can use the Q&A box and I will get to them at the end of the presentation. And if you want to network with each other or have questions for my team, maybe technical questions, you can use the chat box for that. It should be both enabled at the bottom and should be working well. Just give me 1 second. Okay, I think we can get started right away. If I can find my presentation, sometimes Zoom doesn't, there it is, doesn't show everything. Okay. Yeah, welcome again to today's presentation. Today we're going to be talking about the parts of the proposal. So what parts you have to cover and what are the important things that you have to include in a project proposal. Just a disclaimer, since I had COVID a couple of months ago, I have a little bit problems breathing when I have to talk for that long. So sometimes maybe if I take a tiny break, it's because of that. I'm very sorry for that if that's a distraction, but I have to figure out a standing desk, I think, because sitting and talking into the computer doesn't seem to be what my body likes anymore. So I'm sorry if I hope that's not too distracting. I'll just take a second every now and then to breathe a bit deeper. I'm sorry for that. Yeah, so we can get started with today's presentation about the parts of the proposal. I don't have to introduce myself, I guess. I think I've seen all of your names before, so I think you all know who's talking to you. We've been talking about this cycle a lot in the last days, and today we've actually reached the third step. Yesterday we talked about the differences between a proposal and a concept note. Today we will talk more in detail about the proposal, because usually when you reach that third step, the application step, when you are asked to send something over, what people want to see, what foundations want to see is a proposal, a full proposal document that then serves them so that they can decide if they want to give you funding, if they want to fund your project, and how they want to move on with you. So this is the stage that we're in now. And yeah, this is what we're going to be talking about today. So what are the parts of a normal proposal? This is the main thing that we focus on today. Usually, you start with the introduction or the summary. That's the very first part. We will look at all of these parts in more detail in a bit. This is just the overview for you to know what we're going to be talking about. So that is the first part, where you tell the donors what your project is about, and you give them a quick summary. Then we get to the project rationale or the background, where you explain what the problem is, why it needs solving, why you are the perfect partner to solve it, etc. So that's why you can give all the background data, all the case studies, etc. That we've already talked about a bit. Then you talk about project beneficiaries or the target groups that you are working with. So whose life are you aiming to change? Who do you want to work with, and who do you want to address? Then you have project goals and objectives. So what do you want to achieve? What is the impact that you want to achieve? What are the changes that you want to achieve in your target group's lives or in society even? And then you talk about strategies and activities. So that describes the actual plan, how you want to achieve that. What are the actual steps that you want to take, the actual things that you want to implement to actually achieve those goals and objectives. Then you get to the results that is usually connected to your objectives. We'll talk about vocabulary here. That's often not a single section in the proposal, but it's all lumped together. Then you have the budget, where you have to say how much money you want to spend for what, where your budget is allocated, and how many resources do you need. Then you have a timeline where you describe what are milestones, how long your project is supposed to run in total. So is it a 1-year project, a 6-month project, a 5-year project, whatever it might be, and what are some milestones along the way that you have to achieve by a specific point in time. And then you have the monitoring and evaluation plan that you often have to include, because you also have to show the donor that how you are going to prove to them that your project was successful, that you're moving along just fine. And in the end, you have to show a sustainability plan, often that talks about how your project is going to sustain itself long term, so how you're going to exist long term and be a successful and a reliable partner in the long term. So those are the normal parts of a proposal that you usually have to cover. And again, when donors give you guidelines about things they want to see in a proposal, the structure might be different. And in those cases, you have to follow those guidelines in every detail. So you just have to cover what they ask you, and whichever words they use those words. So if they ask you, if they are not asking for the project background, but for the justification, then you call it justification. If they don't ask you to send in a monitoring and evaluation plan, then you don't have to do that. It's good use for you internally. But in general, if there are rules or guidelines, then you just have to follow those guidelines and be very strict about doing so. But if they just ask you to send a proposal without giving you guidelines, then this is a structure that you can follow. This is a very common structure, or at least these are the things that you should cover. Doesn't always matter in which order you put them, although the order we propose here makes sense, I think. But you can change that up. But usually those are the things that you need to cover, at least, that the donor needs to know about to be able to make a decision about your proposal. So we will start with the first part. Usually the very, very first thing is the cover page, cover letter, etc. We have some articles and resources about that, also how to choose a good project title, because that's more important than you might think. So those articles are available on proposalsforngos.com. So you can check that out, because that already gives you a good idea on how you can structure that. But then of the real proposal, the first part that you would have would be the introduction or the summary. Basically, the summary is just supposed to cover the W questions that you learn at school. So who wants to do what, where, when, why, and how. So when somebody reads your summary, they should be able to have a very good understanding of the contents of your proposal, a very good understanding of what you want to do with your project, what the issue is, etc. The summary shouldn't be the first thing you write, even though it's in the beginning, obviously. But often while you develop a proposal, while you work on it, and especially if several people work on it, you will make changes. So if you write the summary first and then stuff in the end changes, sometimes it doesn't get reflected properly in the summary. But you should also not write it last minute. That's something very, very common. We always see that when there's typos or maybe sentences are not correctly finished. That happens if you write the summary just last minute. I've seen that was in scientific context, but when I went to the printer to print my master's thesis, I've seen people that were still working on the summary and the introduction while half of their stuff was already printing because they were so late. And obviously that's when mistakes happen if you have to hurry so much. So try to avoid that and give yourself some time, because this part is super important. It's the first piece of text that people read. And so it needs to be interesting it needs to be a good reflection of your entire proposal. Usually, the project managers first, or the grant managers at a donor's office, they would first read the summary. If they decide this is interesting, they might skip to the budget or to beneficiaries, whichever part is interesting for them next. But obviously, the summary needs to catch their attention. But then it becomes important again, because if the grant officer says, yes, this is a good proposal, I think we should send this to the board, to the committee, then when the committee decides about the merits of your proposal, they will again only read the summary. The board of a foundation or the committee that decides, often they have to decide in I don't know, 50, they have 50 proposals and they have to decide which 20 get funded. So they don't have time to read all the proposals. What they will do is they will just read the summaries. So that's why this is so important, that this is succinct, that it's to the point, that it's correct, that it's nicely worded, and that it gives a good idea about all the interesting facets of your project. So for example, if you have an innovation element, then describe that in the summary. Don't leave it out. Don't make it too short. Just really think about what is interesting about your project and what do you want represented in this part. But again, at the same time, keep it as short as possible, because people don't have time. A summary is supposed to be short. So if you have a 5-page proposal, don't write a 1-page summary. That's not the relation that it should be. It should be much shorter, and it should give like a really quick introduction and a short way of understanding your proposal. Then you get to the project background or the justification, the rationale, the relevance, however you want to call that part. This is where you explain the problem. So you start with a problem statement. What is the actual problem in the community that you want to work with? What is the problem that you want to work on? And then you have to explain that as well as possible. So here, it is important that you use data, if possible, to prove your point, because if you just claim something, it's not a proof that that it's actually the way it is. So you should be able to prove it with data, with actual information, and the proper information. So you can use case studies for that. For example, your own case studies, but obviously also scientific case studies or others, if you have access to those, or statistical data that you can often get from government offices or sometimes from the statistics department. Whatever kind of data you can find to prove and to show the actual extent of the problem that you want to solve is going to be super helpful. Because again, we talked about that a bit yesterday, but not every donor is a specialist in the area that you work in, especially if you apply for a big international, maybe even call, then donors might get proposals from all different kinds of countries and circumstances, and they can't be an expert for every single country and every single set of circumstances. So you need to help them understand the issue that you want to solve, and you cannot expect that they know as much about the issue, about the community you want to work in, etc., than as you do. So really explain this in a way that people without all this prior knowledge can understand. For this, it's super helpful if you have proofreaders from the outside that can tell you, oh, there's a red thread missing, or I don't get this part, I don't understand this part. And that can tell you if there's anything missing. And again, here you have to look at the kind of donor you apply with. No, if you if there's an international call that just asks for environmental projects in general, any country can apply. Well, then you probably have to give a bit more detail. If you apply with a local foundation that specifically funds education projects in your district, then maybe you don't have to explain the entire problem of education in your country. Maybe then you can kind of start a bit later, a bit more, a bit deeper into the subject matter. No, you have to look at who you're talking to. You have to understand your audience to be able to draft this properly. And again, this part is so important, because if donors don't understand why they should work with you on this issue, then it doesn't matter how amazing your project description is, then they will just not see the need. They will not want to solve this with you if they don't understand why that issue is an issue. No, so this is a really important part. You can use case studies, you can use your own history, you can also show success stories if you already have some. Use statistical data. You don't have to give like a whole bibliography in the end, but you could work with footnotes or just put the source in brackets behind so that they know where you take this data from. Be a bit careful about where you take data from. Not every source is a reliable source. It's not science, so the process is not as rigorous as if you're writing a PhD thesis, but at the same time, you still have to be careful that the data is correct and it comes from a relatable source. The next part that you have to cover is you talk about the project participants or target group, the people that you want to work with. This is super important because donors want to see numbers here. They want to understand who you are working for, who you're working with, and whose lives, whose realities you want to change. So those are usually the people getting into touch, working with, getting in contact with your project. You have 3 different categories. The stakeholder category isn't that important in the proposal. Usually you don't have to cover that, but it is super important for project planning to understand the landscape that you are navigating in, to understand who else has a stake, has an interest in the community you want to work with, so that you can ensure your project success. So it is great if you know all the stakeholders, and sometimes you can also list them off kind of and explain how you're going to work with them, especially if you're expecting a problem in the future with those groups, or if there might be a problem, but they are usually not something that you have to cover in a proposal. The 2 very important categories that you do have to cover are the direct participants and the indirect participants of your project. So that means direct participants means people that directly interact and work with your project. So people that you train, that come to your workshops, that come to your office, that you consult with, etc. So people that you directly interact with and that are directly part of your project. So, for example, in the project that I used to work with in Nepal, it was an agricultural project. So the direct participants were the people taking part in our workshops. They were the people receiving plants from our project that directly interacted with my team. Usually you can count, or you can kind of gauge this number quite well, because usually you would know how many people would attend your trainings, or at least you have an idea. You would know how many people will you expect to come to your offices to take you up on the offer. You would know how many students would go to a school if you want to build a school, etc. So you have a quite good idea about that number usually. Indirect participants are people who will also benefit from your project results, but that do not necessarily directly interact and directly benefit from your project. So there's like a step in between. So, for example, they could be family members of the people that directly benefit from your project. To stay with the Nepal example, the indirect participants were the families of the farmers that workshops. So because they also benefited from the project, obviously, if the farmers came and learned about better agricultural techniques or more economic selling techniques, etc., they had more household income. So obviously the entire household would benefit from this. Or if you build a school for students, the entire community would benefit from this, the parents as well, the teachers, etc. So you have to think who else you are influencing with your project, whose else's lives you're touching. And those would be the indirect beneficiaries. This number is, or participants, this number is also super important because I think what many donors do is they look at the budget and they divide that by the participants or the indirect participants, and then they look at the number in terms of how much you spend per person, how many people can you influence, how much impact per person do you have per dollar spent. So this number should be high as possible, but obviously still realistic. So I've seen what I would usually do in Nepal, for example, I look at the average family size, and then I would say, okay, 20 people come to our workshop. Those are the direct participants. Average family size in the village I worked in was 5.6 people, I think, if I remember correctly, maybe it was more. So I would multiply 20 times 5.6, and then I would get to the number, obviously round up, you don't have half people. Then I would get the number of indirect participants, and I could still explain how I came up with that number. I've also seen crazy stuff like one project that was working in the catchment area of a small river in the Himalayas, but that river was floating into another river, and that river again into the next one, and the last one was going into the Ganges River. So they claimed that everybody in that entire catchment area of the Ganges in India and later would also be part of the indirect participants or beneficiaries, because if they protected their own catchment area from soil erosion, that erosion material would never get downstream, which is correct, but that's not how this works. Then you would usually, maybe you could say the people in the catchment area of that particular small river could be part of the indirect participants, but not everybody downstream from that. That would be too much, and that would be an overclaim. So try to come up with the highest realistic numbers that you can come up with, because it is important that you show that you do work with a substantial amount of people. I mean, depending on the budget, if you're applying for a super small number, then obviously not, but it needs to be realistic, and it needs to always to be in relation to what you're applying for and what you're promising. Then we get to the goals and objectives, and this is all interconnected with the project results as well, that we will look at in a bit. And this is where many people get confused. We will look into this in much more detail when we talk about the log frame, because that is the base for a log frame. But it is important that you understand the distinctions between those terms and how they are connected with each other. So goals and objectives describe what you want to achieve, not how you want to achieve it, but what you want to achieve in terms of impact, in terms of change in the people's lives or in society, whichever level you're working on. So what are the changes that you want to achieve? And you have 4 terms here: the vision, mission, goals, and objectives. And the vision and the mission are very broad, and they are not usually not to be used in a project proposal. They are used in promotion materials on the website. Our mission is to change, to achieve a world without hunger. Our vision is to achieve a world where no child has to die. It has to die young because of sickness or something like that. It's something very broad. Usually the vision is something, as the word already says, that it cannot be achieved. It is something that you aspire to, that can be huge. I mean, some organizations can achieve their visions, but it would be a huge undertaking. The mission is a bit more narrow already. So the mission could be something that you could achieve within 20 years of working, or 50 years within the lifespan of your organization. But still, it's possible that it's not achievable, because it's still something aspirational, something that you would aspire to do with your work, with all your effort, but there's no guarantee that you can actually achieve it. But when we get to goals and objectives, that is much more specific on the project level, and that is also what is interesting in a project proposal. because donors will be asking for that. Often it's called goals and objectives. Sometimes it's also called the overall goal and the specific goal, or the overall objective and the specific objective. It doesn't really help that donors switch up those terms. But what you do have to understand is that the goal, or the general goal, or the overall objective, or whatever they call it, is usually what you want to achieve with one project. And the objectives are on the lower level, smaller things that you want to achieve within that project. So usually if you achieve 3 objectives, that leads to the one goal that is kind of the umbrella of that project. So that is also how you would like to formulate it. We will look at that in a bit more detail on one of the next slides. But in general, what is important here is to understand that kind of ranking of level of detail of those terms. Vision, mission is, you have to understand that it should be in your theory of change, etc. But that is not what you would describe in your project proposal. It will inform how you plan projects, and it will give you the roadmap and the direction of your organization. But it's nothing that you can achieve within one project or one program. So it's not going to be described in detail in your project proposal. But your goals and objectives are, because they are further down on that chain. And usually a goal is something that you can achieve with one project or one program, and objectives are even under that and should be achievable on the level underneath. Objectives should be SMART. Maybe you've already, you know that term or that abbreviation. It means that they should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So what does that mean? When you formulate your objectives, when you put them in writing, you should think about something that is super specific. So where you describe who wants to do what, where, when, which, and why. So how and why is that, which is how, but it doesn't have a W, so I put it this way. So be super specific, because objectives are something, when you describe that in your project proposal, you need to be able to achieve those. And if they are not SMART, it's super difficult to, in the end, say if you've achieved them or not. Just because it's very difficult to say so, to determine this if they are not SMART, if you don't formulate them as SMART objectives. So that's why this is so important. So first of all, they need to be very specific, because otherwise, again, if you formulate something unspecific, if you don't, if you say we want to achieve better education, but you don't say for whom, for which group of people, and you don't say by when, and you don't say why, then how are you going to say, yes, we did that? Because you might have educated young people, but you didn't educate older people. Well, that wasn't your objective, but you didn't formulate it specifically, so you would still not have fulfilled that. So that's why it's so important to be super specific. Measurable, obviously, is the second one. If you want to say at some point, yes, we have achieved that, you need to be able to measure that objective, if you've achieved it or not. So you need to create a criteria that are quantitative or qualitatively measurable. This becomes even more important when we talk about indicators, and that we will do next week in the log frame one. But objectives need to be measurable. So you need to be able to say, yes, we achieved it, or no, we haven't by X% by this value, whatever it might be. Then they need to be achievable in general. So you shouldn't set yourself up for failure by choosing objectives that are way too too far away, not reachable. Stuff like, we have one example later where it becomes very obvious, like if you want to enhance school attendance, for example, to say that you want to achieve 100% school attendance would be an objective that looks nice, but it's not achievable, because it doesn't matter how amazing your school is. You can do all the teacher training, you can renovate buildings, etc. You will never reach 100% because kids get sick. Some kids just don't want to go to school, just can't go to school, have specific circumstances. You will never get to 100%. And that's not because you make a mistake or your work is not good. It is because the objective, or in that case, the indicator, school attendance at 100% is not achievable. So be sure that you can achieve those, that you are within the boundaries of a working objective. Then obviously they need to be relevant. They need to be relevant for the target group, but also they need to be relevant to show the project success that you want to show. Sometimes we see that people get a bit lost in thinking about objectives that are measurable, and then they don't really show project success. So everything needs to be connected. No, they need to be relevant for the things that you want to show long term. And they need to be time bound. We said that before. If you have no time frame on them, then should you achieve that within 1 year, within 10 years? What's your time frame? If you don't set that, then it's very difficult to measure them or to be able to say we have achieved that or we have not achieved that if you don't have a time frame on that. So they need to be time bound as well. So those are the criteria for SMART objectives. And you really have to include all of those to be able to fill out a log frame and to kind of have them helping you to show your project success and to show what you actually want to achieve and to make the donor understand what you want to do. We will, again, talk about this more when we talk about log frame, but another another word for log frame is the intervention logic. And that shows a bit more why log frame and objectives and goals, etc., are important, because this framework shows to the donor your logic behind the interventions that you want to do and how you think that will contribute towards the impact that you want to have. So it's another way of making sure that donors understand your project and understand the way that you want to go. Then we have strategies and activities which show how you want to actually get there. So those are the specific things that you need to do to achieve your goals and objectives, to achieve the impact that you want to have. So usually you have a different set of activities that often can be lumped together under a strategy. So the strategy is more of the approach, how you want to do this. So one strategy could be running awareness campaigns. Another strategy could be to build buildings. Another strategy could be to have teacher training. And then you have activities under those strategies. So whatever it might be, like teach the teachers' helpers, train the teachers, train the administration personnel. Those could be 3 activities. Or if you run an awareness campaign, one activity could be a festival, one activity could be a workshop, one activity could be house visits, something like that. So those are the things that actually describe your plan, what you want to do step by step. And it's crucial that you keep those 2 apart, that you describe your activities, what you want to do, and then you describe what you want to achieve with those activities. And that is 2 things that we often see lumped together. That when the question is what do you want to achieve with your project, then the applicants put there, oh, we want to run a teacher's training. But that would be the activity. The thing they want to achieve with their project is not just implementing that activity, is that teachers are trained better equipped to deal with students' problems or whatever it might be. So keeping those 2 apart, the activities and the objectives, is key to writing a good and structured proposal. And if you can do that, you're already 10 steps ahead of most people. And this is something that also still happens to me. That is one of the things that I always have to do, is pick apart the activities and the impact, because it's very natural to want to lump that together. And once you stop doing that and you have the clear distinction, your proposal will be so much clearer and will have so much better direction. Then we have the results, which describe what you want to achieve, again, but after the project. That's very closely connected to objectives and goals. But here again, you have the 3 different categories. You have output, outcome, and impact. The output is the direct result of an activity. So here you would be at the very, very bottom kind of stage of impact still, or of project results. The output of a teacher's training is the teachers attended the training and learned something. So very, very basic, what happens immediately after the training. But it's a little bit more than just teachers were there. It's a tiny bit more. They were there, they attended, they learned something. Then you have the outcome. And the outcome is kind of midterm. So what happens next? What do the teachers do with that? Ideally, they would use their knowledge and have better lessons, because they've learned how to design lessons, or how to talk to students in a different way, whatever it might be, what they have learned. So that's the midterm result of the activity that you did. What happens next? What do the people that you've trained do with their new knowledge? And then when you look at the very long term, you have impact. So that's then what happens in society after those steps. Does the entire society change? Does the entire education system change? Does the education for everyone change? Whatever the impact is that you want to contribute to. And this word contribute to is super important here, because usually no project can claim that they alone have changed society or have achieved a huge change in attitude, whatever it might be, on the level of the entire society. Usually you always just contribute to, which is completely fine, because no donor expects you to solve society's problems with one project alone. But so the wording is important here. So if you want to talk about impact, you should always use words like we contribute to, we did our part to show that you know that your work is important, but it can just do its small part to actually achieving that that impact. And on the next slide, we will see a bit how this all comes together. So activities and the results all belong together, and you can put them kind of in a pyramid or in a chain, or however you want to call it. So at the bottom, you have the activities. That's the first thing that you do. So it's controlled by you, controlled by the project, and it is what is done within the project to achieve the results that you want to achieve. So those are your activities. Then at the next level, you get to the output. Those are the goods and services provided by the project, but they have already been taken up by the target group. Then those two are still under your control. You control if you do the activities, you still control the direct output of your activities, because you are interacting directly with people, etc. And then you have outcome and impact, which is midterm and long-term. And those are only controlled by the target group, not by you anymore. Because what happens then, what happens in the outcome, the midterm behavior change of the target group, is not in your control. If the teachers use the training, if they want to implement parts of it, it's not under your control anymore. It's under the control of the target group. And even more so, the long-term impact, the project contributes towards that, and it's absolutely not in your control anymore if that actually happens in the long term. So this is just an idea to give you of how these belong together. Again, we'll talk a bit more about this when we talk about the log frame next week, because those become very important in these circumstances. And important is to understand that this is kind of a chain. You start at the bottom with activities, and then you move your way up or along those steps to actually get to the impact. Then we also have assumptions that you often have to cover, or risks, assumptions and risks. But here we just, I just want to introduce the term assumptions, because assumptions describe the situations, events, conditions, or decisions which are necessary for the success of the project, but which are largely or completely beyond the control of the project's management. They need to happen for the output, outcome, and impact to actually take place. So again, this is something we'll see in the intervention logic next week. But generally, this is again somewhere where you can show that you really understand the project, that you understand the circumstances that you work in, and that you understand what the circumstances are in which you navigate. So usually those are things like climate change, climate conditions don't change too much, or the government restrictions will not be imposed, stuff like that. But they are things that need to happen for your project to be successful. And those are things that you assume about the circumstances in which you implement your project. Okay, now we get to the budget, which is, again, it's a part that many proposal writers don't like too much, because it can become very complicated, it can become tricky, but it's super important that the budget is correct, because I think this is the part that many donors take a detailed look at, because they also want to see that you are able to report back properly, that you are able to manage funds, obviously, if you get the project. So if the budget in the project proposal is already messed up, they might think, oh, maybe you're not good with numbers, maybe your accounting department isn't going to be able to really manage the grant if you get it. So this is a part where you need to be very careful. And a quote or a saying that I really like, I think that describes this very well, is that the project budget is supposed to be a description of your project, but in numbers. So you should still be able to understand the interventions of your project if you just look at the budget without even reading the text. So the numbers have to be quite clear and have to be quite self-explanatory. There's two main kinds of budgets that donors ask for, and they are both depicted here. On the left side, you see an activity based budget, and on the right side, you see a line item based budget. The difference is, on the left, with the activity based budget, you have, in this example, 2 activities. And you just write under the activity, you write all the cost that you would have to cover for that particular activity. So here you have an annual conference. For that, you need a trainer, venue, transportation, catering, and materials. And then you have another activity, which would be training the volunteers. And again, you have different kinds of costs. And this is a very logical way to design a budget. It makes a lot of sense. And again, here it's super easy to understand the different activities and to understand what the project wants to do. If you organize your budget by line item, it means that you kind of lump together all the same kinds of cost. So here you see at the right side, you have personnel cost. In this case, it's just trainer. You have services, transportation lumped together, catering lumped together, and other costs, which is venue and handout. So you have to combine all those numbers. And I think the reason behind that is oftentimes donors have specific budgets for specific kinds of costs, especially if it's personnel, because they always look at that in a different light. And they just want to know how the distribution is within your project. But obviously, it's much more complicated to do the budget on the right, the line item based one. So what we recommend is to always, even if they ask for a line item based one, always start with the activity based budget. Do that first, and then you can still develop a line item based one out of that. But if you follow the activities, it's much easier to not forget anything, to not forget any items or any specific points that you might forget if you start with the right side. Then we have the timeline. These are just 2 very simple examples of a timeline. So what you need to show is how long the project is supposed to run and what specific milestones along the way are, by when you think you can achieve them, etc. The top part is a Gantt chart. So here you have the task, the activities on the left side, and then you indicate who will do what. and when. And again, the who is important because you can already assign responsibilities. On the right side, you can say who has to do which task. So that's going to be super helpful for you to then later use it as a work plan as well. The bottom is a simple timeline. If you have a very simple, straightforward project with 1 or 2 activities, that can be an alternative as well, because it shows how one activity will will go along in the course of time. And you can see in the bottom one, we have definite timestamps, so actual dates. The top one, it just starts with month 1, month 2. So depending on if you know that a project has to start or end by a specific date or not, you can use one or the other. And now we get to the simple example of monitoring and evaluation that you often have to include. This is just, like I said, a very simple example, and 2 example projects where you could, Vicky, where you can show how you can design the monitoring and evaluation. Again, more detail next Tuesday in the log frame one, but in general, you would set indicators with values, with the baseline value where you are today and a target value that you want to achieve, and then a milestone along the way that you have to achieve to actually show project success. So here the indicator in this case would be teacher training. The baseline value, so today's situation is 12% of teachers received additional training. You have a target value of 90%, and then after 1 year achieved, so this project is already running, they're already describing what happens. Next indicator is attendance rates. Attendance rate at baseline was 67, and the target value is 100%. And again, this is a bad example. We put this in here on purpose because 100% is not a good target value, because how can you achieve 100%? It's almost impossible. So this shows how you are going to show success, how you're showing if your project is running successfully, or if there's any issues along the way. And this will also help you to find or to encounter roadblocks once you implement the project. So this will carry on into the implementation phase, obviously, and will be used to show your success or your failure in project implementation. And then the last part of most proposals is the sustainability plan. And here again, it's important to understand that usually what they want to see here is the project sustainability. So they want to understand how the project is going to run long term, how you are going to finance and support the project long term. Often it's not the ask for environmental sustainability, even though environmental sustainability is a cross-cutting issue. We'll have a slide about that after this. So you always have to address this. You cannot suggest that your personnel fly everywhere and that you will just eat from plastic plates and cups, whatever. You have to think about those things and address them, obviously. But often in the project, in the sustainability plan, what donors want to see is how you're going to sustain the project long term, because they want to make sure that the investment they make, and a grant is often seen like an investment, is going to be there long term and is going to have a long term impact. So you have the 3 parts: the financial, organizational, and community sustainability. Financial sustainability means how you're going to finance your project long term. So that could be through another grant, it could be through membership fees, could be through money given by project participants, whatever it might be. But it talks about the financial sustainability. Organizational is how stable is your organization, basically. Are you going to be a stable and good partner long term, or are you going to vanish at some point? So here you have to show that you are a sustainable long-term partner. And the community sustainability talks about how well your project is rooted in the community, and how well people like your project and will be willing to carry on even without you. So how much of the initiative came from inside the community and how much came from outside. And next Thursday, I believe, we have another webinar specifically about the sustainability plan. So we'll talk about this in much more detail. Just a quick introduction. So we'll have a full hour to talk about the sustainability plan and everything it implies. Yeah, and the last thing I want to quickly cover are cross-cutting issues, because often you have to address them in a proposal as well. They are additional issues or areas that intersect with the main project or can be easily integrated into the project without losing focus on the main goal. They can be an effective tool for explaining how targeted impact in one project area can also have a much wider effect. So often those things are environmental issues. So again, the ecological sustainability, or could be things like gender equality, so that you, even if your project is not specifically about gender questions, you should still address gender inequality in your project. So you should still make sure that there's as many women participating as men, or that the board has many women on them, whatever it might be, but you still have to show that you're addressing these things. So those will be typical cross-cutting issues. Often they are formulated, for example, but if you want to apply with the European Commission or UN departments, they always tell you which are cross-cutting issues that you do have to address. And you really have to keep those in mind, because if you don't, you might get a rejection. That happened to me, for example, with an application I sent to an organization where I didn't think enough about the environmental concerns, or I did, but I didn't formulate that properly. So our proposal wasn't accepted because of that. So they really are important, and you really have to consider them. Yeah, with that, we come to the end of the presentation. We still have a little bit of time for questions. This is our usual information about the courses. Again, if you want to learn anything else, any other particular topics, please check out philanthropia.org and look at our courses. Use the coupon code Fundraise if you want to sign up for any of those. They are super helpful and can really help you get along. Then we have the donor database that you can find at donordatabase.org, where you can get information for your donor research, where you can actually find donors and find information about potential partners. And I also recommend you try that. Okay, now we have time for questions. I see there's a couple of questions that we can check out. First question is, are there guidelines and checklists that we can use to review proposals beyond donor guidelines? I think if there is guidelines, obviously those are your rules. Otherwise, you can go through the checklists that we also provide, and go through. For example, we have an ebook that covers everything related to proposal writing. I think that already gives you a great indication. What you can also do nowadays, which is it's not a fix for everything, but it could be interesting, particularly if your proposal is not too long. If you have 20 pages, not, but if it's just 5, I think that should still be possible. You can put it into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, tell it, we are writing a proposal for this donor. This is what we have. Can you tell us if anything is missing? And ChatGPT might be able to detect anything. If you have some glaring gaps, at least usually it will protect it and will let you know. Not protect, detect it. There's another question about the budget. We're making a concept note. A full budget is not possible due to space restrictions. What can we do? In that case, usually in a concept note, you wouldn't, like you said, you wouldn't include the full budget, but just how much money you need. Usually that's the number that they want to see. So you just say, we want to apply for this amount, or the project will cost this amount, we apply for this amount, and the rest will be covered by XYZ. I think usually that's enough in a concept note or in the concept note stage. Or sometimes you can include a super simple budget that just says, this is the project cost, this is our own contribution, this is what we apply for. Usually those are the 3 numbers that they need to know. So I would limit myself to those numbers, I think. And then the next part of that question is, when we make a budget, how to include the admin cost. Often you can include a specific percentage as admin or core cost. Sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 15%. This is something that you should clear with the donor before you write a budget, but it's then a percentage of the entire project budget. You can also sometimes include cost, whatever. If you run, let's say you have a training and that's your activity, and you run the training at your own office, you can include, for example, rent, even though you don't have to specifically pay rent. But if you are paying rent for the office and you're using your office for that, you can include it there. So that really helps you to cover that cost. And you just have to choose one of the activities that you want to kind of attribute that to. I hope that already helps. Then there's a question about, how do I break down the financial budget while writing a proposal for a long-term sustainability plan? I'm not sure if I really understand that question, sorry. I would think that if you write a sustainability plan and you have specific activities that you want to do to make sure that your project is successful in the long term, then you have to think of activities that would contribute towards that. So that way you can include it in your project budget. And breaking down is often the easiest way is just to do it according to activities, or sometimes it doesn't have to be that detailed. Sometimes it can be just under specific objectives. If you have several activities under that, really going according to the activities always helps me to not forget anything. So that's more like a tool that helps me to go through the budget. But I don't think that donors are such sticklers to this. If you have maybe one kind of cost that could go into 2 activities, you can still do that, or you could split it up or just have it under one, as long as it makes sense. And with your budget, if you have numbers in there that you think are not self-explanatory, you can always also include a budget narrative. So that's a text or part of text that you include with the budget, so that a donor can understand easier what you mean by those numbers if they are not self-explanatory. There's a last question by Sonika. Is the budget the most important part of the proposal, or should I focus more on showing the goals and objectives of my NGO? Budget is very important. It needs to be correct. It needs to be logical. You don't want to seem like you want to overspend. It needs to, be in relation to what you want to achieve. But again, showing the goals but not of your NGO, but of the specific project in that case. Because usually when you apply for a project, everything should be focused on that project, not on the general work of your NGO. Is equally important. If the donors don't understand the impact that you want to have, if they don't understand why this is an issue and what you want to change, then it's tricky. I think the budget is it should be correct. That is the most important part. And obviously, you probably have to focus some time on this. And again, if you feel like the numbers are not self-explanatory, add a budget explanation or a budget narrative. And yeah, it is important. I think it's super difficult to say this part is not important. All parts are important. But the budget is something that many donors take as an indication for how well you are able to manage funds as well. So you should definitely take care that it's correct and that it's presented in a way that is logical. Okay, thank you so much for being part of this again. Very interesting questions as always. And yeah, we still have another session this week, actually, on Thursday. We'll talk about proposal mistakes, things that can go wrong, and things you should really look out for before you submit. So I think that's also going to be very, very interesting. And then next week, we have 2 more sessions about the sustainability plan and the log frame. Log frame, I think, is on Tuesday, but check the schedule again. I'm not as reliable as I should be in telling you dates because I keep confusing them. But then we also have the sustainability plan, which again is super important and interesting and can really be a game changer in your proposals, I would say. Thanks again. Have a good rest of the week, and I'll see you on Thursday, I hope. Bye-bye.